Welcome, everyone, to the Boiling Point Podcast. I am your host, JD. Alongside me is Senior Unexplained Phenomena Correspondent, Uncle Mark. This is episode 65, Evidence of Giants in the Mounds of Pennsylvania. Uncle Mark, we're going to be talking about giants again, which we have done in some other episodes. You should go check them out if you haven't seen them. But you brought some live visuals for us, and we also have pictures of them up for everybody so that you can take a look at them as well. Yeah. Uncle Mark now has his own storefront, so make sure you check that out at arrowheads.com, and then you'll go to the storefront, Whitcomb Relic World. And I'll put the link in the description of this video once we have it posted. But make sure you check that out, arrowheads.com, and then search for the storefront, Whitcomb Relic World. And you can find what Uncle Mark's relics and everything that he does. He restores them and makes them look nice again.
And things for sale. There's artifacts for sale.
Yep, that also. And it's doing pretty good, so make sure you go check it out and pick up something or share it out if you aren't interested in artifacts. Share it out. Maybe one of your friends will be.
Yep, if you want real authentic arrowheads and points, I'm the guy to come to.
Absolutely. Because you've been doing it for a long time, too. As we discussed, you have more than, 25, 30 years experience?
I've been doing it since the 70s, so
40 years. So 40 plus years of this is what he has is in terms of...
and I studied under the top authenticator in the world to make sure that I knew what was real and what wasn't. So anything you get from me is going to be real. I study everything under a stereo microscope, just to ensure that anything I sell is authentic. So,
excellent. And we're going to be talking about giants in this episode, and you brought some tools with us. So let's get into that.
So, in the previous podcast, we talked about the origin and the history of the giants and everything.
Yep.
And since we live in Pennsylvania, I thought we'd talk about the giant skeletons found in relation to the mounds all throughout Pennsylvania, and show some artifacts that I acquired that seem to verify and belong to giants. So, and I'll give you my reasoning why then when we're done talking about things. A lot of the info that I got here was from a book called Ages of the Giants, A Cultural History of the Tall Ones in Prehistoric America. And he had quite a bit on the Pennsylvania mounds, and there's not a lot really of information that they've recorded on them, because back when they tore down the mounds, they didn't really do a lot of cultural paperwork and so to speak. So anyway, a lot of these were constructed during the early woodland period. That's between 1000 to 200 BC. So the Adena people, we call them the Adena group, the Adena culture. They constructed extensive burial mounds and earthworks throughout the Ohio Valley in Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And many of the skeletal remains that are found in these mounds by the early Antiquarians and the 20th century archaeologists, they were powerfully built individuals reaching between 6.5 and 8 feet in height. It's the record of these remains that gave rise to the subject of the giants of the Ohio Valley. Now, they called the Ohio Valley that whole sector from Ohio to Kentucky to West Virginia. Yeah. So, anyway, the author of the book Ages of the Giants, when he went to research it, he was struck by how little bit of archaeology that some of the regions have that were accessible to the public. They were almost non-existent. And one of these areas is our state, Pennsylvania, where the Carnegie Museum destroyed countless burial mounds without filing comprehensive reports in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Many of the mounds wrecked by the Carnegie are only known to the public from old press reports, such as the following one I found that was published in The Sun, December 8th, 1893. And what it said was, this mound, which was originally about 100 feet long and more than 12 feet high, has been somewhat worn down by time. It is on the J.R. Sechrist farm in South Huntington Township. The most interesting feature in the recent excavation was the mummified torso of the human body. Portions of the bones dug up and the bones in the legs, Professor Peterkin declared, are those of a person between 8 and 9 feet in height. Now, in order to add a little bit of clarity to the subject of the mound builders and the large skeletal remains from here in Pennsylvania, they the guy went through a considerable amount of literature from the state and incorporated the information into his book. So it's a well done book that was fantastically researched, because he went to field notes and things like that aren't available to the public normally. So the guy was pretty smart.
Now,
anyway,
if I can ask real quick, break in here. You said they found remains of people that were 8 to 9 feet tall. Now, just to be clear, because during this episode, we are not going to be talking about the big giants,
right? Exactly.
As we did in the previous episodes. You should go check out that episode. This is going to be like the descendants of the giants.
Right. The original giants were much larger than the ones that are. Oh, we're talking about 1000 BC. As time went on, the giants got less tall, shrunk, got smaller and smaller.
Yes, because
throughout time, as they were interbred with humanity, I guess, so to speak. But
or just a natural breakdown of their own DNA.
Right.
Because we know that after the Great Flood, as we've talked about in another episode, or was it with you or was it with Pastor Gavin? I think
it
was
me.
We both discussed it, actually.
We both talked about that.
Yeah, but after the Great Flood, did something to the
height. They were. I think the difference...
The atmosphere. That's what I was trying to say. The atmosphere.
Right.
The Great Flood did something different to the atmosphere.
The difference of the atmosphere, the cosmic rays, the X-rays, the gamma rays that the water vapor canopy shielded everything from were now pertinent and penetrating.
Yes.
And as a result, it
led to more breakdowns of many things, bodies and even DNA and stuff like that.
Yeah,
as we talked about with dinosaurs also, it was after the Great Flood that dinosaurs began to shrink. And they weren't called dinosaurs at the time; they were called dragons.
Dragons, right?
But let's save that for that, and back to this. So these are the descendants of the giants. These were people who were 8 or 9 feet tall, not 20
These weren't
feet
the
tall
20 to 50 foot tall. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure people are clear on that.
Now the average Indian was 5'2" to 5'4", so. In relationship to the Native American at that time, these were big, tall guys. So,
yes, I mean at 5.5 feet tall, you're looking at someone who's 9 feet tall. Then that's almost double you. That's almost double your height. You would consider them giants.
That's a big difference. Yes,
especially if you didn't see them before. They weren't common in your culture. Then you would think they were giants.
Yeah, and most of them had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And we had talked about that before. When they went up to the white man, they showed their hand. And they were showing that they had 5 fingers, not 6.
Yeah.
That they weren't of the giants. So,
yes.
We talked about that quite a bit in some of our other podcasts.
Yes, in some of the episodes. You should go check them out. They're in the 40s. Episode 37 through 44 is the series you want to check out, where pretty much between Uncle Mark and Pastor Gavin, I go back and forth between episodes, and we pretty much cover. It's pretty much like a 6-episode arc, really, between Uncle Mark and Pastor Gavin. So you should go check out that series of episodes.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that we showed there. So.
And a lot of crossover from one episode to the next. It was really, and it was not planned. It happened organically, which is why it's a great series of episodes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But back to these giants, or the 8 to 9 foot variety.
Well, anyway, perhaps the most famous press reports describing a large skeleton from a Pennsylvania mound was the case in Union Township. And that's in Washington County in Pennsylvania, of course. In 1932, archaeologist George Fisher excavated the mound after he was informed that amateurs were engaged in heavy looting at the site. This situation attracted hundreds of spectators, and Fisher's work became the subject of daily discussion by the local media. One discovery in particular was regularly reported at this time. And this is a press report. One of the most interesting reports that will go into the archives is that on the body of a giant, 7 foot 5 inches tall. This titan was found on the 5th level of the clay mound, where the bodies were sandwiched between 11 layers of sandstone. The majority of the adults measured between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 3 inches in stature. And that's from the Daily Republican, September 15th of 1932. So, one of the skeletons of these mighty men is 7 foot 5 inches in length, and even the remains of the women and children show them to have been of tremendous stature. Heavily primitive faces must have topped their mammoth bodies, Fisher says, for all the skulls are heavy boned and massive jaws and strong teeth that could have ripped meat into shreds. And that was from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, September 14th, 1932. So those are a couple of the news reports that as they were doing this stuff. Now, you have to understand a lot of this stuff wasn't really publicized and wasn't comprehensively published and or archived like it is today.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of stuff today goes by the wayside. Things go missing and reports are never filed. So there's a lot of lacks as far as the archaeological professional community. The majority of what we learn comes from our amateur archaeologists, really. So anyway, over the last decade, these type of press reports have caused several researchers to seek out more information on the mound excavated by Fisher, but until now it remained largely a mystery. And the authors of this book here, they found the site was known in the archaeological literature as the Pollux Hill Stone Mound. There's some debate over the age and cultural affiliations of the mound. Archaeologist and Adena expert Don Drago considered the Pollux Hill cairn to belong to an Adena stone mound sub-tradition. In more modern times, archaeologists have reevaluated some of the mounds that Drago included in this cultural taxon and have suggested they could actually date to the late woodland times, several hundred years after the age of Adena. Now, here's the problem. The original mounds that contained the giants weren't the huge mounds that we see today. They were added to by later cultures and later burials that you'll find in there.
Okay.
And the top layers had normal-sized Indians buried in them. As the deeper you go, the more bigger the people the giants were. So I think they're wrong in that, trying to date that to a later time. The later woodland period, which is roughly 1000 BC to 800 AD. There were burials in that, but they were added to and on top of the original mounds. Okay. So they're wrong in that suggestion. Those woodland things that they had found there were added at a later time period. So I disagree with them on that.
Okay.
One reason for the difficulty in finding professionally documented information on the Pollux Hill cairn is the fact that Fisher himself did not publish the official report. Instead, Donald Cadzoll published a report in 1933 utilizing information taken directly from Fisher's field notes. According to Cadzoll's document, Fisher unearthed an extended adult skeleton covered with packed mud and rocks in the northwestern portion of the mound, which is numbered burial 39 in the field notes. Regarding the burial, Cadzoll reportedly states, as the bones were in poor condition and it was impossible to obtain exact measurements. Their size, however, indicated a very large, heavy person, much larger than the other burials in the mound. Following the excavation, the bones of over 40 skeletons from Pollux Hill were transported to the museum in Harrisburg and then to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. In October 12, 1932, the Pittsburgh Press reported that Donald Cadzoll himself was the person in charge of transporting the skeletons from Finleyville to the museum, noting, "One skeleton making the trip with Cadzoll to the Capitol was a giant 7 foot 5 inches in height." The information in the article came from an interview with Cadzoll, who took the opportunity to condemn the Carnegie Museum's handling of Pennsylvania's prehistory. Now, they took and transported them to the museum in Harrisburg and then to the Smithsonian Institution, where they disappeared. Why does everything concerning giants that go to the Smithsonian disappear? You know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's another example of things that were concerning giants that were transported to the Smithsonian and they disappear. We see that time and time again. There's newspaper reports. I have newspaper reports that continually state they were taken to the Smithsonian where they disappear. So what are they doing with them? Yeah. I heard one guy's theory that they go to the Vatican vaults, but that's highway. That's speculation at best. There's no proof of that. But
what do you think? Do you have an opinion on what do you think?
I don't know what they're doing with them, but I've seen incidents after incidents that they go to the Smithsonian, takes over, and then they disappear. You don't see nothing. You don't hear nothing. They're not in the Smithsonian Museum because I went down and looked for them. They're not in there. So.
Interesting. Have you ever gone down with like one of these reports and said, "Hey, you were supposed to have this. Where is it?"
No, but I did ask the curators, and they just looked at me down there. No, there's nothing like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Oh, well, I said, well, there's giant. Oh, well, they were dinosaur bones. They thought they were giants.
Well, maybe we can recruit Uncle Mark to do a field episode for us sometime in the future.
Down in accost
have you wear
again.
Have you wear a camera phone on your vest so we can so we can see what's going on.
One on the hat. Wear my shirt.
Yeah. So that way we can see what they really have to say there. You know, and then show the people. We'll look into that for you, everybody. We're gonna work on that, putting that together maybe for early or mid next year maybe. Or whenever we can get Uncle Mark to have time to go to the Smithsonian again.
Yeah, there we go. Well, I wanted to tell them some of the artifacts that they found in the Pollock Hill Cairn. There was 2 rolled copper tubular beads, bone hairpins, stemmed and tangled points, stone point arrowheads, celts, stone mortar, and perforated canine bear teeth. So I'm going to show you a picture then of the celts that they found in the mounds. We're going to show you pictures of what a mound looks like, and we're going to show you some pictures of some other things that they pulled out of these mounds. That a lot of what we're going to give you now are mainly field notes because they had no official records of a lot of stuff. So anyway. Large skeletal remains were recovered from the Mckees rock mound, which once overlooked the confluence of the Ohio River and Carter's Creek at Stone Township in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Frank Gerardi excavated the Mckees rock mound on behalf of the Carnegie Museum in 1896. Unfortunately, several controversies led to Gerardi's resignation from the Carnegie and permanent retreat from archaeology before a complete report was filed for excavations. Now, what happened between him and Carnegie, I don't know if it had to do with the giants themselves or what was going on there, but he quit Carnegie, left the whole shebang, and nobody really knows why, but I suspect it could have been what was found in the mounds and what he wanted to report and what they didn't, but unfortunately, several controversies led to his resignation.
Well, that always the way it goes.
Yeah. So anyway, in the book, The Ages of the Giants, they utilized Gerard's field notes as well as the research of 5 different archaeologists who reviewed the field notes, looked at the artifacts and the bones from the mound to recreate the discoveries at this important site. And it was 16 or 17 feet in height at the time of the excavation and 85 feet in diameter. Now, sometimes they plowed right over top of them and planted crops right on them, you know. Sometimes they cleared them, you know. So not all of them are even in existence anymore. But at this time, it was 16 to 17 feet high and 85 feet in diameter, so pretty good size.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these mounds to the untrained eye could just look like hills, couldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, when you're excavating and stuff,
you can see one down on Route 30, there's a field there where there's a big mound that's still there. You can see it. It's got trees growing out of it and stuff. But, yeah, I've often been curious to go look at that a little closer.
Yeah.
One day I will. So, but anyway, I digress. Anyway, there were over 30 barrels in the mound of extended, cremated, and bone-bundled human remains, many of which were found in stone-schist tombs. In other words, tombs that were made of stone. They lined them with stone.
Yeah.
The mound was built up in 3 construction phases, each of which took an unknown length of time to complete. Now, see, the original was the old one with the giants. The next structure was a latter culture, and then the third structure was an even later culture.
Yeah.
And that's why I say they're wrong when they're trying to put them into a woodland period. The original ones were old. They were the old ones. So, anyway,
the ones at the bottom of these.
The very bottom was the originals. Yes.
Of the mounds.
Yes.
And has anybody dug that far down? Have they gotten one big enough? I mean, you said...
yeah, these all have been dug to the base. That's where they found the giants. The biggest guys were at the very bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, they phased them... The span of the time was from the Adena to the end of the middle woodland. The oldest primary of the phase of the mound was 3.5 feet high, and it was made of river sand and clay, which covered the skeleton of an Adena female 6 foot 2 inches in length. So the original was 3.5 feet high. The one when they went there to look, it was 17 foot high. So these other cultures built on and added on to it as throughout history.
Yeah.
Artifacts in this burial included an adze, 4 deer or elk awls, a copper sheath for an imitation bear canine, 357 shell beads, 153 marginella shell beads. Now they come from the shore of the ocean, so they would travel quite a way with them. Antler and bone flaking tools, and a slate reel-shaped gorget. Gorget is a 2-hole, looks like an ornament. Some figured they were breastplates, some figured they were necklace ornaments. We don't know because we weren't alive back then, so it's one guess. But, I'll show a picture. We'll show a picture of them, of what gorgets are and what they look like then.
All right.
Adena culture always had 2 holes drilled in their gorgets. The Susquehannock and the Indians in the local areas here, a lot of times they'd have 1 hole. So, burial 20 was the female in a sandstone cist tomb. Referring to the burial, Frank Giodotti's field notes mention the person could not have been less than 6 foot 6 inches high. The skull of this burial had been crushed down into the breastbones, and the bones of the feet were missing, which is bizarre, right? I mean, their heads crushed down into their chest, and the feet are missing. That's must have been I don't know what happened to her.
Yeah.
According to historian George Thornton Fleming, who carefully documented the excavations, the remains would have measured 7 foot in height, with the feet and neck intact. There were several other skeletons at Mckees Rock, which measured between 6'2" and 6'4" in length. So, again, you're getting further up, you're getting smaller.
Yeah.
In the northwestern Pennsylvania, many burial mounds have been attributed to the Hopewell influence tradition, which some archaeologists have referred to as the Squawky Hill culture. Now, this is a Hopewell blade, okay?
Okay.
I would put that in the Hopewell culture. Anyway, and we'll talk about these things in a little bit. The Squawky Hill mounds are also found in northeastern Ohio, too, the Upper Ohio Valley in West Virginia and New York State. These mounds date to the Middle Woodland, usually between 100 BC to 500 AD. Squawky Hill sites in Pennsylvania include Sugar Run, Corn Irvin, and Corn Planter Mound groups. At the Corn Planter Run site in Warren County, Edmund Carpenter investigated 2 surviving mounds in 1941. He found the mounds to contain circular stone vaults composed of stone slabs, also featuring stone roofing. The tombs were all empty, but one still contained a blade, red ochre, and calcified bone. In other words, the bones turned to dust, okay? According to Carpenter's report, a local artifact collector named Dudley Martin had looted the tombs prior to his investigations. Fortunately, Martin himself had gone public with his findings in January 27, 1937 issue of the Altoona Tribune. Now, they're putting these into the Hopewell cultures and put them into the woodland, but we're still talking about unique burials at the very bottom. So I think the very bottom were older cultures, and these were built on like all the other ones.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dudley Martin, octogenarian and collector of Indian relicans. Do you know what an octogenarian is?
No, I don't think I do.
An octogenarian is someone that's in his 80s. 80 to 89. Now, why they don't just say Martin who's in his 80s and an artifact collector, I don't know. But anyway, states that he was present at the opening of some curious burial mounds on the Corn Planter Indian Reservation in Warren County nearly 50 years ago. These burials were walled up inside and had air outlets to the open air, so much so that at one opening on one mound it was found to be full of rattlesnakes. I bet that was a blast.
Yeah.
They got a stone box there. Oh, right. They opened it up as 4 rattlesnakes.
Yeah. That's interesting.
In one mound was found a skeleton of a chief 7 feet tall, wearing much barbaric adornment and jewelry. That was what Dudley said about it. So, there's many similar accounts from burial mounds featuring traits similar to the Corn Planter mounds along the Pennsylvania-New York state border region. Especially in that area itself, there seems to be a lot of them. Upper northern Pennsylvania into the New York area.
Okay.
Just over the line in Genesee Township, a mound about 14 feet in diameter, walled up by a stone cairn about 3 or 4 feet high, Some curious person dug into the side of the mound and brought to light the skeleton of a man of gigantic size, also the bones of a dog. Really?
Also the bones of a
I
dog.
guess maybe the giant had a pet dog. I don't, I don't.
I guess, yeah.
That's kind of odd, though, isn't it? Nearly all the bones crumbling upon exposure to the air.
You'd have to wonder what that dog might have done, though, to warn. I mean, if that's the only dog, is that normal in your findings of these? That there's been pets or dogs in with them?
No, that's the only one I know of in any of the mounds that were excavated.
So then you would have to wonder, what could that dog have done to be worthy of being buried with people, though? Like, that's how I would look at it. If it's not something that happened, it doesn't occur to me that that's just a fluke. Oh, we're just going to bury this dog with all of a sudden. So maybe the dog did something to warrant burial with his or her master.
Right, because dogs have been domesticated for thousands of years, and that might have been his dog.
Maybe. That's what. Well, I mean, but the fact that you haven't found him anywhere else, though, would state to me that maybe there's something special about this dog. Maybe
I would agree.
Went above and beyond in some way.
There's something unusual that dog was buried there too.
Yeah, that's what. That's
and it wasn't a later thing, because the bones, once they were exposed to the air, they were so old that they crumbled to dust. So that tells you it's not in the Hopewell or the Adena culture. These are older.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't be crumbling to dust when they're exposed to the air.
Yeah.
So, anyway, they had a dog. Nearly all the bones crumbled upon exposure to the air. With the bones were found numerous flint arrowheads and some stone ornaments, and about a pint of small shells, which also soon disintegrated upon exposure. So we're talking about an old, that's an old ancient burial.
That's old stuff. Yeah.
In December 1886. W.H. Scoville of Andrews Settlement discovered a mound at Elliotsburg. On exploring it were found parts of a skeleton of a man measuring between 7 and 8 feet. Michael Lesson, this is in the history of counties of McKees, Elk, Cameron, and Potter in Pennsylvania, okay?
Mm-hmm. I know where that is.
This is a book was written in 1860, so it's an old book anyway. The mound was opened by vandals about 25 years ago, and entire skeletons in a good state of preservation were tossed aside or carried off by schoolboys. They were looking for the artifacts. They didn't care about bones, so they just, as they dug them out, they threw them all out to the side. Many of the remains were found near the surface, over by broad flagstones, while others were found at a considerable depth. Great quantities of arrowheads, discoidals, stone axes, and beads of various kinds were discovered with the bones. Some of the skeletons were of such large proportions as to indicate that the people who lived in the days when the mounds were built were a race of giants. That was from the Pittsburgh Daily Post, October 7th, 1895. So, back then, archaeology was still in an infant stage, and people dug this stuff up for the artifacts, and they didn't care about history. They didn't care about the bones. They were looking for artifacts. So,
yeah. How old is archaeology? Would you say? I mean, or at least what we would consider modern day archaeology, where you're worried about the preservation of things.
I would say in the 40s.
In the 40s.
Yeah, 1940s to the 50s, it started to get a little more scientific in there. Before there was a lot of just
which doesn't seem really to be right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying it just seems like that the fact that just recently we've started to try and document and preserve these items.
Obviously they were doing this in the late 1800s, and there were museums and stuff then, but
it was different.
It wasn't the scientifically and culturally as advanced as it is now.
Yeah,
and I think that was like into the 40s and 50s. It started to become more scientifically based.
Yeah, where they were worried about preserving things like skeletons
and recording.
Absolutely the recording of things.
And they would take the samples of charcoal and things that they could they could try to date. They looked at layers of you could date time through the different layers of sediment. Now that's why I refer to cultures that the oldest is the Paleo, the next is the Archaic, to the Woodland, to the Historical, because that's a true time frame. Their actual dates are so fake. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of they'll fool something with a potassium argon stuff that gives you incredibly wrong dates, and they'll fool with it until they get a date that fits their time frame.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Now,
we discussed carbon dating in a previous episode as well, and why it's not accurate.
A 10,000-year-old living mollusk, come out showing 10,000 years old. There's something wrong with that.
I want to mention that the most recent thing. One of the things that you just said to me that I found interesting was that the documentation of it, both not just with film crews because they didn't have films back then, but even you're reading newspaper reports from that an archaeologist decided to file a story. If he had not decided to file the story, there would be no record of it.
There'd be no These are 1895 newspaper accounts.
Yeah,
you can't find it in that.
But it's only happened because the archaeologist filed the story, not because the newspaper guy was there and interested in what was happening. Exactly. It happened because the archaeologist is the one that filed the story. Right. And I think that's interesting that nobody, even 100 years ago, 150 years ago, was interested in the history of what we can find underground and in graves.
And they never listed it with the state or archaeological society because it was in such a primitive stage that newspapers are the only thing that we can really trace a lot of this stuff through.
Yeah,
and this guy that did the book The Ages of the Giants. Now he went back through different records that people kept from archaeologists now that kept them when they found them and realized their importance.
Yes.
So he did a real service in his research itself. But the only thing that we have, a lot of things are just what the newspapers reported that they told the newspaper about.
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot more advanced now than then, and there's a whole lot better documentation now.
We've talked about ancient civilizations though in a previous episode too, and it always seemed like record keeping was an important aspect from them. So
even those, they realized that.
It seemed like there was a space of time there where humans didn't feel like preserving or remembering things didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Hint, hint.
Well, now sometimes, now there's a lot of idiots in the archaeological world too, and I'll give you an example. Gary Fogelman is, not a personal friend of mine, but probably the most knowledgeable man of Pennsylvania archaeology and Indian information that there is. He's written probably 17 books. He's a very smart man. He knows all about the cultures of the Native Americans here in Pennsylvania. Up along the Susquehanna River, up close to, I'm not going to tell you where. They were, the archaeologists were up there and they were digging a site. And he had stopped and he started to talk to him, and he told him, you're too far down. You need up here's where the site is. And they said, who do you think you are? And he said, nobody. He said, I'm Gary Fogelman. But the one guy said, Gary Fogelman, I have one of your books in my car. And then they were like, but they didn't, they were like, get out of here. Who the heck do you think you are? And he was showing him where the site, he was trying to tell him, here's the site. I know because I've been here. I hunted this site. I know where it is. You're too far down below,
Yeah.
And so that's just one example, but I could tell you more, but I'm digressing.
Well, anybody who wants to go out and look for things can, and that's maybe part of the problem a little bit too.
They're like, you're robbing the past. No, you're saving the past. Those points.
That too. I didn't even think about that actually. I didn't even think about the people who have a problem with digging up these artifacts.
Yeah, well, they're all like, you're robbing. No, you're saving that. Those plows bust up all them points and tools and stuff. When I own artifacts, probably 3/4 of them, 80% of them are broke. The plows have broke them from turning the earth and stuff,
Yeah.
There's only maybe 20% that are still intact and whole. And I salvage them. I record where they are, and I'm saving the past. I'm not stealing. That man told me I could look for them and I could find them. So, no, I'm rescuing the past. I'm not stealing the past.
Yeah.
They're like, they should be in a museum. Do you realize how many thousands of artifacts are in the museum right now?
Yeah.
Do you know how many museums regularly deacquisition and auction them off because they have too many of them? I was over at the State Museum in Harrisburg, and we were talking with the guy, and they had opened up the one door that went down to the basement, and at the bottom of the steps was a whole frame of Paleo Clovis points, fluted Clovis points that are rare. That should have been displayed up top. There were boxes and boxes and boxes of artifacts down there in the basement that they weren't. They couldn't even show them. So, how many thousands of examples does a museum need of this point?
Yeah. That's a good point too. Yeah, I mean, at some point, an arrowhead from that era is an arrowhead from that era.
Right.
You don't need to collect every single one that's found. Yeah.
Right. How many examples of it do you need? So. That's. We're digressing, but
yes,
that's the bottom line with.
Well, that's what we're doing here on the podcast too. Really, we talk often about the past and ancient civilizations, and we're doing it in the digital world now, so we can upload it to the cloud, and it'll be there until the Lord returns.
Right. Yep. So. Anyway, we're gonna show a couple things that came out of the mounds, some of the gorgets and things. We're gonna show them the picture of a mound, so they know what we're talking about. Now, I'd like to talk about what they describe these giants and what they look like. They said the forehead is typically a prominent one, bordered below by fairly prominent brow ridges. The characteristic bulge of the upper and lower jaws is moderate in projection. Usually the cheekbones are not only large in size in themselves, but they have a forward and lateral prominence. In addition to these strong features, Webb and Baby in 1957 remarked upon the great width of the bony chin formed by bilateral eminences. So, and the typical adenocranium were extremely high vaulted. Now that means cone-headed, okay?
Interesting.
A lot of them had elongated skulls, in other words, is what they're saying. So
okay. Now, I see what you're saying.
Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show a couple examples of what I believe were tools and stone implements that were utilized by giants, okay?
Yeah.
Now, the first one I would call into the Hopewell area, it's an extremely large blade. I'm going to pull this over so that these people can see this.
Yep, and we'll have a picture up for you in just a moment as well.
I'll show you a picture of this, but this thing is 9 inches. It's 9 inches big. It's a big giant blade. Now, when you're talking about an Indian who's 5'2" to 5'4", this is not going to be something that would be easily utilized by them. Now, the fact that as huge as this is, it's just unnatural and extremely large for a normal Native American.
Now, I want to talk to you about that because Native Americans did have pretty big weapons considering their size back in the day. So, do you really think that wouldn't be a weapon that a Native American would use?
Well, it's possible, but highly unlikely. Now, spears would have been like shaved down to maybe this width, and there are some that are that long, but this is a utilized tool which could also be varied into a weapon. It's not a spear tip, okay, and that's my point on that. But you're right.
So it could be. So you think it's a multi-use tool of some kind?
It could be a multifunctional tool, but it's not a common size for normal Native Americans.
Okay.
Now you're right. There are some spear tips that are maybe as long as that, which are rare in themselves. But as far as this is a practical weapon. It's not really a spear. So, and that's why I guess I've utilized it. Now, the next thing I have is a hammer. This is a weapon. Now, if you look at that, this thing has been pecked down. And here's a band where they utilized it with the handle. That's where it was tied onto a handle. Now this thing is 5 times the size of a normal hammer or a normal weapon that a Native American would have utilized. It's just it would be impractical for them to use something this big and this huge. So that's another reason I think that this would belong to a giant. Now.
And that's interesting, the groove there where you can see where it was tied on to actually make the hammer.
It was packed in there, around there. That's where it was tied onto a club handle.
Yeah, and the marks, people probably, even with the picture, they may not be able to see them, but Uncle Mark...
Well, we'll show you a picture of it then. But
there's marks at the top of it where you can see where it was being shaped and stuff like that.
Where where it's been grooved the whole way around it for where they tied it onto a handle.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, also the marks in the top and on the sides and stuff from the from chipping it, from shaping it and stuff is what you were talking about earlier.
It's been pecked the whole way around. This has been shaped. The whole thing has been pecked and shaped into a weapon, and it's too big for a normal sized Indian. Now here we've got a club. Now this is a stone club. You can see the handle. How the handle's been pecked and worked into a handle, and this thing is huge. And for a normal 5'2", 5'4" Indian to weld something of this size is impractical as could be. And I believe that this is an actual club that a giant would have utilized. So just to give you an idea of just how big this is. I mean, if somebody hit you with this, what are you going to do? Are you going to block it with your arm?
With a broken arm, you can block it once.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this thing, look how big this thing is. And it's, it took a heck of a man to even swing something like that.
Yeah.
Let alone utilize it. So that's why I believe that they belong to the giants, because they're too big to be utilized by someone that's 5'2", 5'4" tall.
Yeah.
So
a little disproportionate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe that they were utilized by giants, and I can't prove that because I wasn't alive thousands of years ago. But the fact that as large as they are, they're impractical for weapons for a normal Indian to utilize. So
yeah.
That's my thesis on that. So.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of around Pennsylvania. There was a lot of stuff that was discovered. The records were almost non-existent. Most of what we know on the mounds when they excavated them were from newspaper reports and from old notes that some of them had luckily had saved and written down. But so
yeah, as we talked about, the documentation at the time. For a long time was not very good.
Non-existent.
Yeah, non-existent, not there. Which I found interesting too. That's how ancient civilizations were interested in that, and then there was a time period there where no one really cared, and now we're back to where some people care. Some people care, and some people don't give a crap. And then of course you have someone who complains about everything. So
and there's a lot of old records, Belarius, people that thousands of years ago, even in the Sumerians, where they loved antiquities and they kept things like this. And one man, Belarius himself, was always in search of pre-flood artifacts and pre-flood writings and things. So there is records of people that have collected antiquities thousands of years ago, and they have an attraction for most people. A lot of people really are fascinated by things from the past, the ancient past.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm interested in those things too. I mean, they're interesting to see how people lived and what they did.
Yeah, well, you think, well, these are, and
it's interesting to talk about something local.
I'm talking 3,000 to 5,000 years on this piece right here.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to talk about things local here to Pennsylvania, because we've done episodes on the pyramids and in Egypt and in South America and Antarctica.
I think this is the oldest piece I have here, and this is a Pennsylvania piece too. But
yeah, that's what's great, is finding these things just locally too. It's not just in Egypt or in South America. You can find them right here at home as well.
Exactly. There's a lot of interesting things still in the dirt here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
When I first started hunting artifacts back in the late 70s, I was told there was none anymore. Oh, you can't find them anymore.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my older brother Dennis, and he said, "Oh well, I don't know. Nick told me down there on his island, you can go down there and find them on his island. Nick DiPaolo had a small island there he farmed. So I thought, oh, well, maybe you can. So I went down there and I looked and I found arrowheads there. And in fact, there was a groundhog hole that had a stone drill sticking out of the one side of it that I pulled out. And that's what started me hunting artifacts. Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do, before we wrap it up, I just want to tell people so that they know that, you're not blowing a bunch of smoke. So what do you do to confirm that these are, in fact, artifacts from the times?
The time periods.
Time periods, or the fact that
that they're
what do
real.
Do? Yeah, what do you do for that?
There's a 5-stage test that I use.
Okay.
One is the type of stone, whether it's the correct stone for the correct age, the type of napping, whether this is pecking in itself, the patination. Which is an aging process that only time does.
Okay.
And, with flint and things that I can put under the stereo microscope, I look at under a microscope. Now, a stereo microscope is different than a regular microscope because a stereo microscope, you look at the surface. Okay, so you're looking at the surface, not trying to look through something.
Yeah.
And that's really the only way, especially with flint artifacts, arrowheads and that kind of stuff, that's really the only way to know for sure that something is authentic is by looking at it under a stereo microscope.
Okay.
And when you look at it under a stereo microscope, a real artifact will scream its age at you, where a fake one
to someone
tells
who knows.
you the same.
If I looked at it under a microphone, I'd be like, it's a rock.
Well, that's why I went to the top authenticator in the world and studied with him so I would know.
Absolutely.
I was restoring artifacts and I thought, well, what if I'm restoring a fake? Because I give a COA, a certificate of authenticity. I thought, what if I'm doing a fake and I don't know it? I ruin my reputation. So I went and
so you give a certificate of authenticity with items you sell on your
everything. No, everything that I restore, I give a certificate.
Everything that you restore. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's great. That's even better that you do that.
My storefront and artifacts I sell, I always give a lifetime guarantee.
Okay.
If somebody doesn't paper, I buy it back from you.
If someone can prove that it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
So you're willing.
Now, if Grandpa Willie says it's
legitimate.
Somebody with legitimate credentials says that I'm wrong, I buy it back from you.
Okay, excellent. So
in fact, if Uncle Jimmy says I buy it back anyway, I would never.
Yeah, you don't want people to be unhappy. You want people to be satisfied.
I have a lifetime guarantee. If somebody just decides I made a mistake, I take it back. I don't.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you're willing to put that kind of confidence in your own work. I'd imagine you don't have many people returning things if you have that kind of confidence and that kind of backing to prove what your
I've never had anyone return an artifact that said that this isn't real that I said was real.
Excellent. So that means that just goes to your credentials that you already have, and that's what I'm doing. I want people to know that you know what you're talking about here.
And I've been asked about doing authentication, and I may go into that here when I retire.
You may go into it when he retires. Yeah, he's looking into doing things when he retires.
And here's the problem: there are some people that are authenticators that they don't know what they're doing. Okay, they're authenticating fakes.
Yeah,
which is bad. It's bad for the industry. It's bad for everybody.
Yeah, it's bad for history.
I've seen, and I had to tell him. I said, "I'm sorry, this isn't real." Well, this guy said it well, and I don't know if I should name him or not. Putty, Bannerstern Tom. I'm not going to name these people, but there's some that are given COAs that they don't know real from their butts.
So if you have an artifact that you want authentic or not, well, not
if you have a
authenticated, but if you have something that you want to know if it's real, then come to Uncle Mark. You can reach him.
If you have a question and you really want to know, I can tell you.
All right, and you can reach him at restoreit@ymail.com. That's his email address and contact information. Again, his storefront, arrowheads.com. You can find him, just go to arrowheads.com and search the storefront Whitcomb Relic World, and you can find him in his storefront and his email address if you want to get a hold of him. Make sure you share out the episodes. That's really what we need from the viewers right now. If you are still watching this episode, we need you to share out episodes. That's how we're going to get more viewers. So please do that. Share out this episode or another episode if you didn't like this one. Visit our storefront, bonfire.com/store/The Boiling Point Podcast. That's all in lowercase letters. Uncle Mark is wearing just the original logo shirt. I have on the American Cross design that we've been pushing on the storefront. Go check that out. Coffee mugs, sweatshirts, hoodies, t-shirts.
Good stuff. It's a very comfortable shirt. I've washed it a couple times now. It's not junk. This stuff isn't coming off. It doesn't fade, and they're very comfortable. They're soft. They're a nice quality shirt.
Yep, and they hold up. They hold up from multiple washes. Go and get some apparel. That's also how you can support us. But really share our content, share our episodes. That's really what we need people to do right now. And then, of course, if you want to support us further than that, please go to the storefront, pick something up for you or as a gift. Any problems, you can contact me. My email address is jdboilingpoint@gmail.com. If you have any problems with the storefront or the Facebook, you can email me there with any questions or concerns. Senior Unexplained Phenomena Correspondent, Uncle Mark, welcome back, Season 2. He'll be coming back again soon. I am your host, JD, and that's the end. I'm not around, have you found? I'm always on you.